All right, in this video, I'm going to take you through a history of decentralized banking in the United States and the actual likelihood of it to be returning in the very, very near future. All right, so we're going to back down some history, and people always talk about, oh, they want decentralization in Bitcoin. They want, the power taken away from the centralized control and put out to the many. So there was a point in history in this country that we had that. Okay. And I'm going to show you here and back all this up and how it actually might be coming back very soon. All right. So first things first, there was a post here. We're looking at a total of 18.6 million views. This is in the consciousness of people right now. The federal chairman, Jerome Powell, he was asked if he would step down if President Trump asked him to resign. He said flat out, no. The law does not permit the president to even fire the Federal Reserve chair. Powell didn't mention, however, that the Federal Reserve is unconstitutional to begin with, and it never no power was ever granted by the federal government a monopoly to own a bank and manipulates interest rates and counterfeits money. So the big question is not who has the authority over the bank, over one or the other, but whether or not the president or the chairman. The issue is whether the Federal Reserve should even exist at all. And then you've got this 25-minute video by Ron Paul. Now, who is Ron Paul? Check this out. I'm going to play this clip right here.
It is very clear what we should be doing. The founders knew and understood something about inflation. The runaway inflation of the continental dollar was devastating to the economy. So they were explicit. They said no emitting of bills of credit, no printing money, no paper money, and that only gold and silver should be legal tender. All right. Central bank, which means they're using a central. There is no authority in the Constitution authorizing a central bank, which means there should be no Federal Reserve System.
The Federal Reserve System.
No!
I mean, people are going crazy. So, I mean, the effect of ending a Federal Reserve System. So let's just break this down further. All right, so this was first explored back in 1989, and by Ron Paul, was introduced to Congress. And of course, there was no support at the time. But let me just break it down and the potentials of what could happen here. So first of all, this is the Federal Reserve Board Abolition Act, HR 8421. It was actually introduced in May of this year, May 16th. Now, I remember reading it at the time, and I thought, oh, it's going to just fail. But it hasn't been heard yet in Congress. So Congress has not, it's just an introduced status. Now, what's significant is that it actually is supported by 23 co-sponsors, already supported by 23 other congressmen. Now, what's significant about this bill, I did an analysis on this bill, and it actually, I've got a full summary here. Let me just see if I can break. Yeah, so here it is. It's the Federal Reserve Board Abolition Act. So what it's saying here is that it's going to repeal the Federal Reserve Act, which is Title 12 passed in 1913. When everybody was at home on Christmas holiday and Congress wasn't there, they passed in this act. It's been positive. Well, it's been the law since that time. So they're going to manage the dissolution, kind of like a bankruptcy period during the 1 year under the Treasury. So liquidation of assets, transfer everything to the Treasury, and all the liabilities will go to the Treasury as well. So the Treasury will then take control over everything under the Federal Reserve, because you got two branches. You got the Treasury and then you got the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve is acting, like Ron Paul said, outside the Constitution. They're not listening to anything Congress says. They're not listening to anything that the White House says. They do what they want to do. Nobody's allowed to look at what they do. You can't audit them. You can't see what they're doing. So no matter what, we have no idea what they're up to, nor any control over them. They're just rogue. They're a rogue, quasi branch of government. All right. So this is going to completely abolish them. Now, I wouldn't even waste my time talking about this if we didn't just see this this massive change in politics. But what's significant, I'm going to go through the history about some of the decentralized stuff as well, and decentralized banking, and what the effect of this will actually be. So, but before doing that, we have to be realistic. If this doesn't say 218, then we're wasting our time. You people who support Trump, you support the Republicans. If this doesn't say 218, and the Democrats take that, then basically you can just forget about it. You know, we're not going to see any sort of ending of the Federal Reserve. Now, why is it even important in the Federal Reserve? Like, why would it be interesting to look at this? Because the common enemy that we all have is inflation. That's our enemy. That's our common enemy, inflation. Forget the nonsense about everything else, the politics aside. Our common enemy is inflation. You know, costs of everything going up to infinity and runaway inflation. So forget the red and blue. It doesn't really matter. But what matters is a bill gets through Congress like this that ends the Federal Reserve. If we get to 218, we're going to see decentralized banking. Now, if you go back into history, Andrew Jackson. Now, this is important because, you know, you can see right here that Trump, his like favorite president was Andrew Jackson. 5 things to know about the president whose portrait over Donald Trump's chose over the Oval Office. So he chose Andrew Jackson to hang over his Oval Office. That's his, you know, president, obviously, that he looks up to the most because that's who he picked. Now, Jackson was the one that actually stopped. He vetoed the central bank in 1937. Now, for people who were caught up in political issues like slavery and blacks and distracted by the 14th Amendment, let me just show you just to rebut that. Well, first of all, we've been lied to our whole life. Okay, so I'm sorry to tell you that it's going to be a slow wake up call, but we've been completely lied to about everything, and it's sad. But you know, Jackson, sure, he was a slave guy, but let's put the race stuff aside because it wasn't black slaves that he had. He had white slaves. That guy on the right is white. Look. Aaron and Hannah Jackson, 2 slaves owned by Jackson, photographed by Theodore, 1865. This slave for sure is white. Okay, they're saying she was African American on the left. Please, that's not an African. What? Her hair's no. Okay, let's just assume. But even if she is, her hands. Look at her hands. They're not. And this guy is definitely not. He is white. All right. So when we're trying to make a race war about all black slaves, dude, no, white slaves. Andrew Jackson owned white slaves. There's pictures of them right there. So please take the race. Do not take the race. Do not take the fight over the race pill where they try to divide us and say black versus white, because Andrew Jackson, yeah, slavery is bad, but it wasn't blacks. It was whites that he had as slaves. All right. So don't take that. All right. Federal Reserve Act. It's this act right here passed on December 23rd, 1913, that would be repealed. And again, it's all these Federal Reserve banks that have the total control over our monetary system without any oversight. So that's the key. Like that's so important is there's no freaking oversight. And if you go back and you look at the Constitution, and I thought I had my notes on it here already queued up, but Article 1, Section 10, it's very clear that no. Actually, let me pull up the annotated on it. I'll show you here what it says. So here it is right here. Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver, coin, legal tender, payment of debts. So now there's 3 court cases here that it cites, which talks about how this applies to the states, not the federal government. So this is the way they're getting around it. Reliance on this clause, which only applies to the states and not the federal government. That's Juilliard versus Greenman, 1884. The Supreme Court has held that where the marshal of the state received banknotes in payment of discharge of an execution, the creditor was entitled to demand payment in gold and silver, too, 1844, and this other case in 1844. So because, however, nothing in the Constitution prohibiting a bank depositor from consenting where he draws a check from payment made by a draft, a state law prohibiting that checks drawn by local banks should, at the option of banks, be payable in exchange for drafts, was held valid. So that's important because if you go back to the time of Andrew Jackson, all right, where Andrew Jackson, he repealed the federal banks. All right, so it's funny, this fake news Wikipedia does a terrible job at revealing the history on it. Awful job. It's all focused on distraction issues. Look at this. Andrew Jackson being some sort of painted as a king, physical assault, slavery, all this nonsense. The main issue was he was the one that repealed. So it barely even touches on it. Look at this. After Jackson's term, it does a terrible job. It was done by Jackson, paid off the national debt. The only time in history it's ever been paid off. It was paid off by tariffs revenues, carefully managing federal funding, and the sale between lands. So the government had an unexpected spike in land sales. Skips over the history here where he basically took down the banking, the national banks. It just completely skips it over. This absolute fake news on Wikipedia. All right, so here I programmed this bot to provide, better information on this period of decentralized banking, 1836 to 1863. So it was complete banking decentralization. So it began after Andrew Jackson. He vetoed the second bank charter. It ended the second bank's federal oversight role, shifted control entirely to the states. There was no federal banking regulation at that time. State level control. Each state controlled its own banking policy. So a different capitalization requirements, unique banking charter process. So there was a complete free banking of the states. It was largely adopted in New York and then copied from there. Hybrid system, major challenges. So required legislative approval for each bank. And it was a completely decentralized system. Each state controlled how the banks operated. Now, we do have still federal oversight now, so it's never going to be completely decentralized where there's no federal oversight at all of banks with the repeal of the Federal Reserve Act. But it's a look back in history that we have done it before. We've had this decentralized model. Now, why should you care? Well, this Federal Reserve, okay, it was brought into play by a largely, I would say, the lobbyists, the lobby, or the spokesman for the Federal Reserve was this guy right here, Edward Mandelhouse. Now he was extremely close to Wilson, who signed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. So, he actually became a supporter of presidential bid Wilson, 1912, and ultimately, this guy here was a major player in behind the scenes of coercing Wilson to sign the Federal Reserve Act, which Wilson said he would never do before he came into office. Now, why is this important? Well, in their gloating, in his gloating, gloating is probably one of the most evil sins. Never gloat. If you're a Democrat or Republican, if you're a Republican and you support Trump, never gloat over what's happened right now. Okay, please remind yourself, it's a reminder to me, never to gloat. Okay, because it's a sin and it will come back to bite you. Send out love and compassion to the opposing party. Be a good sport. Yeah, I think Derek Jeter was a pretty good example of that. He was always a good sport. Yeah, he won 6 rings, but he never went around gloating about it. He was always like good sport, good game. Best regards to the other side. People like that, Derek Jeter, Lou Gehrig. Now here's an important point though. This guy, Mandelhouse, went gloating to the president, and this came out into the memoirs of Wilson. And he, just to get you inside the mind of this guy, it's not certain as to when it was written, but it was found in the memoirs of Wilson. So personal diary logs. Very soon, American will be required to register their biological property. That's you and your children in a national system designed to keep track of the people, and that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. Pledging, that's the old feudal law. So pledging is the feudal system. Pledge like serf to lord. By such a methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda, which will affect a security as a charge back of our fiat paper currency. So see, now he's got the Federal Reserve in, they've got their fiat paper currency system in. He's now gloating sometime after 1913 to President Wilson. And every American will be forced to register their property, and they will be our chattel, our chattels, our property, and we will hold security interest over them forever by operation of the law merchant under the schemes of the secured transactions. Americans will be unknowingly and unwillingly delivered the bills of lading, birth certificates, and to us, and rendered bankrupt and insolvent, secured by their pledges. They will be stripped of their rights and given commercial value designed to make us profit, and will be none the wiser, for not one in a million could ever figure out our plans. If by accident one or two should figure it out, we have in our arsenal plausible deniability. After all, this is the only logical way to fund our government, by floating liens and debts to the registrants from the form of benefits and privileges. This will inevitably reap us huge profits beyond our wildest expectations, and leave every American a contributor to this fraud, which we will call social insurance. Without realizing it, every American will be unknowingly our servant, however begrudgingly. The people will become helpless without any hope for redemption, and we will employ the high office of presidency for our demi-corporation, the USA, to form this plot against America. So now we have the Federal Reserve, and we've got a glimpse as to what the mindset of these people were from Mendelhaus going forward at the time, and what actually we're facing about potentially repealing this whole thing right now. So, we gotta come together and unite, because right now is, if the House passes at 218, all right, let's just say it passes at 218, and we could say that it does. Then this bill, which is actually in Congress already, it's already been introduced. This bill will likely pass. We know because of Trump's support of Andrew Jackson, because of this mainstream tweet now of Elon Musk with 17 million views on it. So this is in the mainstream consciousness. People are interested in this, and the overwhelming support for the takedown of our enemy, which is inflation. That's our common enemy. That way, it's not a political thing that we have to fight over. We all can unite, and we all have the same enemy, and it's inflation. We got to get rid of inflation. How do we do it? Well, we got to start by getting rid of the Federal Reserve, because we have no idea what they're doing. No clue. We don't know how much money they're printing, how much money they have. We have no idea. We can't audit the Fed, and obviously the White House has no control over them. As Jerome Powell said, he's not going to step down no matter what President Trump says. So let's unite, and let's see what happens. We'll keep an eye on this House race, because this is a big freaking deal. If you want decentralized banking, I got a reply or comment from somebody just the other day saying, the United States of America was supposed to be decentralized, got all screwed up. Yeah, it was. The Constitution was supposed to be that way, but the Federal Reserve System, the Federal Reserve Act, is what stopped all that. Imagine if we actually got rid of the Federal Reserve in 2025, how big that would be, how much joy that would give the people to actually have accountability back at the Treasury and auditability. Now, just a complete change over and everything. I mean, this is the most exciting time to be alive. Decentralized banking, ending the Federal Reserve. Thank you to Ron Paul. Thank you to Elon Musk for getting this out there. And I want to just give my commentary, a little presentation on End the Fed. Decentralized banking is coming your way. And I got to give a plug, because the end of the rainbow, the whole end of the paradigm, is bringing it all on to the public ledger. The public ledger, the original public ledger, makes accountability of everything. That way we have true decentralized banking and true accountability over all this stuff by putting it on the original Bitcoin protocol, which is in 2025 scaled to be doing a minimum of 1 million transactions a second, but likely 2-3 million transactions a second in this big giant legal framework, known as, well, it's known as well, I guess the Bitcoin name is being passed off by the BTC right now, but I think in the future you'll hear the Bitcoin name being the original Bitcoin blockchain that it was supposed to be, known as BSV. So that's it. Hit the ones, subscribe, leave a comment, tell me what you think. Should we end the Fed? See you at the top.